Hi, Dominica.
Hi, Serene. Good to see you.
Nice to see you.
Yes, you know each other, don't you?
So we do. We work together quite a lot recently.
Brilliant. That's wonderful. And thanks for taking an intern. And thanks for taking that intern.
Well, thank you for, to be honest, thanks, Serene, for being our intern. You were much more than an intern. We wanted to keep you around, but we had to finish uni.
So we are now live streaming. So we've just made a good advert for internship at RCA students.
Yep. Great.
I'm going to press record on the Zoom as well. So we've got it on our Moodle system. And I think Carolyn and I share. I'll just do a very quick intro to the recordings of the live stream to welcome you. This is our first one of the new academic year, our kickoff on what internally we call our practitioner talks and externally we call Service Design TV, SDTV. So it's recorded on our YouTube live stream with many other amazing talks that we've been recording over the last couple of years, I think, and some really exciting people there. And we, every Wednesday lunchtime, as much as possible, we'll meet and listen to an amazing design practitioner and share that with everybody out there in the world so you can see what we all do. And it's been hugely successful. Thanks everyone who has watched or is watching this live stream now. So I'm just going to, Carolyn, would you like to do the introduction? We like to share these things, otherwise people get fed up with my voice. But it's really nice to meet you, Dominica. I'm looking forward to your talk, and Carolyn will give you a brief introduction.
Thank you. Nice meeting you too.
Yeah, thank you, Clive. So I think really to build on what Clive just said, welcome to everyone. You're kicking off, Dominica, our practitioner talk series, and it's just an opportunity to get a real feel for what the many roles and the many environments that service designers can find themselves in, and the many different levels. And I know that you, from a design research background, but at Connected Places Catapult, you've been looking at futures, and obviously connected places, you know, how people live, work, get around is all super interesting from a service design perspective. So we're really looking forward to hearing what you've been involved in and your perspectives on service design. So over to you, and thank you again.
Great, thank you very much again. Thanks for having me, and I'm slightly stressed, very excited to be here. And yes, I'll share my slides. And like you mentioned, I am at Connected Places Catapult working a bit with the features recently, but overall for the majority of my time there, I was doing work that's a bit more present based. So I will show you what I've been up to, and mainly I will firstly tell you just a tiny bit about myself and how did I get here. Then I'll tell you a bit about a real life project that we did at CPC that's not future oriented, and that's very much something that kind of brought a real change to people on the ground. Then I'll tell a bit about the future-oriented project that is a commercial one, also at CPC, and actually Serene, who's I think on the call today, was a major part of that project. So shout out to Serene from the very beginning. And then I'll tell you a tiny bit about a different type of approaching future projects from a more sort of speculative and a non-commercial way. So I'll just minimize myself so to not look at my face. And yeah, I think after this, I will try to answer as many of your questions as possible. So please take notes if there's anything you'd like to ask me later. So how did I get here? So probably as many of you, I haven't started as service designer. I studied my bachelor's as surface design, which is basically printmaking at London College of Communication. Then had a bit of a break in the middle, not really knowing what to do, and ended up doing master's in design innovation at the Glasgow School of Art, where I kind of specialized in environmental design, but mainly I was given an opportunity after graduating to actually work at GSA at their Innovation Institute for another year, and did a few projects in their mostly based in the kind of Scottish Highlands. But what I did later is I actually got a job in London at Connected Places Catapult. Then it was called Future Cities Catapult, as a user researcher, but that very quickly, within a month, really morphed into a more of a design research role, kind of considering my design background and sort of design inspirations. And one of the projects that I think I'm the most proud of, and that I think is a very good example of how service design can be made in a different environment rather than just kind of UK based stuff that we usually do at the Catapult, is a project that we did in Bangalore called Innovation for Clean Air. And it was a collaboration between Indian Institute of Science, several Catapults, Innovate UK, and some other partners. So our main goal was to support UK and Indian firms and small SMEs to develop innovations to improve air quality and tackle pollution at source in Bangalore. And that was a fairly long project. It lasted for a bit over than 2 years. And it started before we even knew COVID will be a thing, and it ended in the sort of middle of the pandemic. So most of the work that we did was remote. And this is something very important to say when talking about this project, because that obviously impacted our methodologies greatly. So our work was really divided into 3 stages. Firstly, we did some knowledge capturing and sharing. So firstly, we wanted to even identify what is the air quality market in India, what are the opportunities that are in there. And we did this by going there, actually physically going there at the time, and doing some workshops and engagement with local SMEs and innovators in Bangalore to see what are their needs and how does it even look like? What is it that we could bring there that could be an innovation? Then we did an SME competition. So we did an open call to find Indian and British SMEs and small innovators who could deliver these solutions to answer the air quality challenges or support kind of drive to the more greener Bangalore at the time. And we selected an area of partners that we then continued to work with. And finally, sorry, I clearly didn't close my Outlook. So finally, we took a year between 2020 to 2021 to do some innovation testing and demonstration by creating testbed locations in Bangalore and collaborating with local partners to, well, see what we can innovate on and see and collect a lot of feedback. So firstly, our research focused on understanding how and why people commute around the city. So Catapult is kind of oriented in mobility and air quality are were the main kind of 2 strands of that project. So we started by conducting journey diaries, focus groups, talking to people about their current travel and commute patterns, what are their daily pain points commuting in such a busy city, what are even the attitudes towards electric vehicles and the experiences of them, because we didn't know what is the level of information about this in that place and whether people are keen to even approach this or not. And we collaborated quite heavily with local partners because that's obviously very important, especially if people who you will be working with are far away from you and might be living in a different culture or a different environment. So what we did is, as I said at the beginning, we were very far away from each other. We were far away by distance. We were far away because of the time zones being different. And also we were far away because there was COVID and obviously we couldn't fly around and there was a lot of other challenges around this. So we decided we were trying to find a good medium to communicate between our partners on the ground, but also people who we actually were working with, who are our testers and our kind of users who we were doing this project with. And we ended up using WhatsApp, and I'm putting so much emphasis on WhatsApp in this one slide because that was perhaps one of the key elements that made this project work. So we used it because it's very popular in India. There it's used both for formal and informal settings. And also it's suitable to kind of impromptu create some participation groups. And the importance of the tone being informal and accessibility and trust was extremely important to us and also to the people that we worked with. we realized that if we are to be working together for a year, and if we are to be trusting one another, it has to be slightly informal, and we have to be able to kind of, in an agile way, as much as I'm not a fan of the word, communicate with each other. So WhatsApp really made all of this possible. And I skipped a slide. So what we did is we ended up setting up test beds with our local partners and with our selected SMEs. So none of the names of the SMEs are here, but just to name a few, we worked with people producing air filtering masks, so pollution filtering masks, pollution sensors for both indoors and outdoors, several different types of electric vehicles, such as electric rickshaws and electric 2- and 3-wheel bikes. So for example, electric cargo bikes, and also the ones that you can use for your daily commute. And we chose 4 different testbed locations. One was an office, one was a series of families that we worked with in their own homes. One was a clean air street, which is, this particular one was Church Street in Bangalore, that we managed to pedestrianize for every weekend in the course of 5 months to create this safe space for people to test those new technologies, but also get to know each other, create a dialogue, and create the sense of community around those cleaner initiatives. And also schools, but sadly, due to quarantine, we were not able to actually run anything in schools because schools were closed. But these partners who are here on the screen really helped us make this possible. And again, to me, it's very important to show them to you, because without them, none of that would be possible to us. And it's kind of their own initiative and ability to collaborate with us, but also translate to us the needs of the community and also the challenges that they might be facing that we might not be aware of, was very important. So again, transparency and collaboration is really key to, I think, doing projects that are, at such distance and in such tricky circumstances. But basically, we ended up helping several partners and several SMEs improve their products and introduce them to the streets and to the homes in Bangalore. And this is just a few of the SMEs that we worked with. But to name a few, Masti Bikes deployed their prototype e-bike for 5 months in the street that I mentioned. And after gathering feedback through surveys that we designed and through kind of face-to-face conversations that they run, they gathered feedback from over 250 users, and users being families, little kids, young people who are commuting to school. And what they ended up doing is they completely redeveloped one of their models of the bikes, realizing that there are certain safety features and certain comfort features that are not there yet. And after the feedback from the community, they've been implemented, and now they are trying to produce the bike and scale it up. The other person that we worked with is a young entrepreneur from the AIR project, who I actually believe went to the RCA a while ago. And he created this air pollution sensor that just measures the air pollution levels in your home and sends you information about how high they are and certain recommendations of what you can do with them. But what he didn't realize before he deployed with several families in India during this program is that there are certain ways and behaviors, different types of cooking, different types of incense that's being used, different areas that are very different to his own London life, and certain communications, certain recommendations have to be tailored to that specific way of living. So that testbed allowed him to just tailor what the communication is of his product to actually have a positive impact on the people who will be using it. And we did this testbed through actual diary studies done through WhatsApp and very regular calls with the people that were testing them. We really developed a bond. I was laughing that I would be surprised if we don't send each other, holiday cards, because they know about my cats, I know about their families. We kind of created a conversation that really allowed for honesty and kind of true sharing between ourselves. And the final one that I like to mention is our own London-based Airhead. So they are creating this pollution mask that you can wear when you're running or cycling. That is obviously very useful if you're at the very polluted street of a large city. And what they were allowed to do is to actually change the shape of the mask slightly to accommodate different types of faces and different shapes of head, and also adding certain features such as kind of bits to add cycling goggles, which is something that they didn't think of, but our users in Bangalore suggested they might do. So to name a few, there was an actual real impact that this project has provided, and we were all very proud and very honored that we were able to collaborate with so many great people. So kind of to take away from this, there can be culture and trust barriers preventing participants from contributing to the expected level, but you really have to make sure that you mitigate that you allow for very honest communication, and also that you do your own research. And if you can't do your own research yourself, connect with those who can give you that cultural insight, because you want to be sensitive, and also you want to take the best advantage of the situation that you're in. So really do your research and make sure that you're not missing anything. Then there's a line between being persistent and being annoying. And I really truly believe that if you ever find yourself doing a diary study, that might be a moment when you will be quite frustrated with the fact that you're not getting enough information. But at a certain moment, you have to make a call and let people live their lives. And if they don't want to help you anymore, that's completely fine. And you can't be annoyed at this. Then that you might lack understanding of the culture, which creates barriers. But I guess I mentioned that already, that different countries might have different laws, and also those about data and GDPR. So as easy as it sounds, obviously we collected tons of data during this project, but data collected in here and data collected in there is bound by different laws. And you have to be aware of this. You have to have a legal department that will draft good and reliable contracts, because you want to be fair to the people that you're working with. And this is something that you cannot miss. And you cannot, like it's often said, try it and then ask for forgiveness rather than asking for permission. Here, you really have to ask for permission first. And then finally, collaborate with locals as much as you can, and always give them credit. And that's, I think, the main takeaways that I got from this project. The next one is a future project that is also a commercial one that is also done at Connected Places category. Very recently, we actually submitted this report and the final deliverable about 2 weeks ago. And this is the one that Serene, who is in this call, was a huge part of. She was really one of the 4-people crew who created this project. So again, thanks, Serene, because it was really good to be working with you. And the purpose of this project was Victoria Station, the Network Rail who stands behind Victoria Station in London, asked us to create narratives and personas, helping imagine the future of Victoria Station, introducing future technologies, and contributing to the kind of resilient development of the station up until 2070. So we were asked to create a series of stories. We were very excited, but also slightly confused at the beginning, because none of us really had experience in rail or experience in station. So what we did is we started by doing literature review, we did trend analysis, we did a lot of expert interviews to even understand what train stations are today, where are they going that we definitely know of, what are the first principles of the stations, what are the technologies that are currently on the rise, specifically connected to transport, but also everything else that's around us that might have an impact in the future. We also went to Victoria and took a look at the everyday operations of the station. What are their problems? Where does the trash go? Where does the cargo come from? How are the people flowing through the space? And what are the sort of tricky bits that might need to be taken care of? So we really did quite a lot of research, report reading, observations. It seemed like a lot at the beginning, but slowly it started we started seeing emerging trends and emerging threads that we kept and followed with in the next stages of the project. So what we did later is, because obviously future stories feature future technologies, And to ground the speculations of the technologies, we did some backcasting, trying to understand what are the trajectories and what are the most possible ways things could emerge and evolve from now on. Because obviously technology changes very quickly, and to speculate what's going to happen in 2070 is quite difficult. But there is a way to write a narrative like this, and one of the ways is backcasting. So what we did first, and what does it even mean, is that we first looked at how did the train station look like when it first emerged, when the rail first was invented. And we looked at how did tickets work, how did the station work, how did the security work in a train station back in the 1900s. And slowly we brought it back to the future, looking at 2050. So our characters who are situated in the future, we tried to look back at what steps, what new legislations, what new policies, what new technology advancements would have to happen for them to allow that scenario that we are trying to build. And this is just a screen of something that our other intern, Trisha Rathwood, did. And she majorly did it for each single character that we designed for, to really make sure that we can ground our speculations in some sort of facts, or at least in some sort of logic. And what we did later is we started building the personas, but there are many ways of approaching futures, and we really had to set the tone before we went any further. And this is something that I really want to stress, because I think this is very important. We needed to understand what are the expectations of our client. So you can build a future scenario that's very scary, that's very disturbing. It can be Charlie Brooker and do Black Mirror and just make people very afraid and, slightly unsure about their own motivations. This is one way of going around things. You can go and be extremely practical and just highlight only the little bits that should be changed. And that's, also a way of doing. What we went for this time is deciding on the sort of aspirational instead of possible, of painting this very blue sky scenario where everything is working very well and allowing the client to take as much as they want from it and get inspired. And one thing that I think is important is that obviously we featured a lot of technologies, and a lot of technologies in the future can be very arguable morally. For example, we used surveillance drones in several of our stories. But what we did is we presented them in the favor of our user or in the favor of our individual. So we said everybody can opt out of this, or you even have to opt in if you would like to be featured in this kind of surveillance program. Instead of maximizing the potential and showing how much the technology can give us, because it's a speculation and because we didn't ask anybody for permission, we would always put the technology in the favor of the individual to not create chaos and to not create too much of scary speculations, because that's not our job. That's Charlie Brooker's job, or that's a job of a different type of project. Also, being very transparent about the uncertain character of the work and having slightly vague portrayal of the stories that we would show is quite important too, because ultimately you might think you know which direction things are going, but you don't know exactly. And it's very important to make sure that you never say that this will happen for sure, because you don't know, and you don't want to have that responsibility on yourself or putting it on everybody else either. So finally, and that's a screen of the report that Serene designed, we developed 6 narratives, each showcasing different type of person and different type of motivations. And these narratives were containers for the achievements of both the people, but mostly the station, because ultimately the station was our client. Also, the technologies that could be used there, as well as the use of space and behaviors, modeled on the space and behaviors that are there today. And the backcasting that I mentioned really helped us to contextualize and better understand what could happen there and what could be realistic. And perhaps the most important thing to me when creating this sort of stories, especially for commercial purpose, is to be relatable. Sure, technologies change. Sure, environments change, but people and people's own motivations and people's own needs don't change that quickly. So what you want to do is to avoid the sort of science fiction scenario where nobody really knows where they are and they don't really know how to relate to the situation. What you want is to create a situation when they can reflect on their own life, on the life of their sister or their pal, and really see the same models that are just maybe catered to by a different technology. So very kind of summing up to take away, working with features, especially commercially, is a huge responsibility. So you really, as much as fun, it's really fun, it's really exciting, but at the same time, you have to make sure that you approach it responsibly. Diversity and representation is crucial, and it's your job to advocate for it. You will very rarely be asked to create a very diverse scenario, and you will rarely be asked, oh, why isn't a person with additional needs featured in that story? It's your responsibility, and it's your responsibility to advocate for it, even if people don't want you to add that. Because our world is very diverse and it's not mentioned enough. And we just, as designers, have to make sure that this is always featured. And also, when speculating, don't try to recommend the future direction. Even though it might feel easy to you, or it might feel that you're very sure of what should happen, never do it. Provoke, provide context, put as much of your knowledge and objective facts as possible, but never recommend, because it's not our job and we're not skilled enough to do this. There's a lot more people that have to come all together to really decide what to do. What we can do is to paint a very good picture and a very good provocation of what could be done. And finally, a very quick run through a final project. So how to approach features, but in a speculative way that's not commercially related. And this is my own kind of side project called Still Not Quite, where we use critical and speculative design to engage with communities and organizations to open a conversation about their own futures. So like know the cone. I don't like showing the cone because a lot of people know the cone quite well, but also not everybody does. So I think it's maybe quite useful to show it. So how we approach features at Still Not Quite is we like to make the features a bit more democratic. And we believe that it's not only the designers and the specialists and the tech gurus that tell us how we will live. Everybody knows how they would like the features to pan out. Not everybody has a voice to do so, though. So what we like to do is we find communities or people connected by the same factor. For example, they all live in a city that's very polluted, or they are all design students. And we find that one signal that joins them. And based on that signal, we write a scenario. So for example, if you live in a very polluted city, what if you couldn't go outside anymore because it's so polluted that it physically harm your health? When we have that group of people in that scenario, we had to find a storytelling medium that will allow people to express their fears or their hopes or their aspirations towards that future. And upon realizing that not everybody can write very well and not everybody can make great drawings, we realized that everybody, regardless of place and of age, interacts with objects, and objects are very good storytelling mediums. So in our workshops, we ask people to create a product from that feature, like they would if they were to, I don't know, sell it on eBay, where they give it a name, they give it a price, they write a description of what that object is. And then we swap with another participant, where the other participant writes a review of that object or that service as they've used it. And by doing this, we create many and many and many narratives, even very tiny ones, from that possible futures that might happen. We then kind of visualized and put them on the marketplace in our website, so you can browse through it. There's a lot of different stories and a lot of different objects in there, but I'll show you one of them just to show you what am I even talking about. So meet Duster, the dog for the smog. It's designed by Saranda. It costs £500, and we don't edit those. This is us, the participants would write it. So Duster is a genetically mutated dog adjusted to the extreme conditions. It has a longer fan-like tail to disperse smog. It has modified muzzle to filter the air and impurities-resistant hair, and it's going to live longer than a regular breed dog because the blood is resistant to all types of poisons and impurities. And now meet Karen, who wrote a review for the duster. So she gave him 3 out of 5 stars. The bad sides are that it's expensive, it's harsh to touch, hard to tame, and doesn't react to basic commands. Not sure if it's about the dog or about Karen herself, not me to judge. And then good things is that it's very elegant. You save on the disposable dog masks. It lives longer. Hers is almost 4 years old, and it doesn't need washing. So basically, it's cheaper to buy for 1-year dogs, but this unique design makes an easy upkeep and makes your friends jealous. So it's an interesting gadget for the affluent. And what this story really gives us is you can, I guess, assess for yourself, but it tells us a lot more about that fictional person's life and the reality that they possibly live in today than just asking about, oh, what are you fearing about the future of a very polluted city? It tells you that, oh, her dog is older, it's almost 4 years, meaning that probably animals live a lot shorter in this reality. It also says about disposable dog masks, so something that we don't have now, but I guess if it's so bad outside, we would have to come up with that sort of product or something similar. It also shows you quite a lot about this sort of influencer and affluent culture that we already obviously are experiencing today. So long story short, objects are, even the non-existing ones, can be very incredibly rich storytelling mediums. And it's surprisingly how easily, given the opportunity, people can build very complex future worlds and very complex scenarios. Everybody who except for working with design students, everybody that we collaborated with had a non-design type of jobs. There were people who work in sports, who are teachers, who are doctors, and still yet they were able to create amazing design objects just because everybody can relate to this. And the future is a lot more than just hopes and fears, and embracing it without moralization can give insights into how people live and what they believe in and what they see today. So Duster is just one of the objects. A lot of objects that have been created through these workshops are a bit morally dubious, but in this case, because it's not a commercial thing and because we're not recommending anybody follows our advice, taking as more of an academic piece, that's where I believe the bit that is a bit more controversial and a bit morally dubious is all right, because if this is a person's actual fear, it's okay that this is materialized in this way, and then that somebody can read it and reflect on it and add it to their own internal discourse. And again, vagueness can be a great friend, because if that dog was, described in an extreme detail, somebody would come around and say like, oh, but that's not possible. Oh no, that would never be allowed to happen. And you don't want this, because of course that hopefully won't ever be allowed to happen. But being vague to a certain extent can really help you paint a picture of the future that then others can talk about. And then that can bring a lot of very productive conversations later on. So I think I've already spoken way too long. If you ever want to chat with me more or just ask me any questions, just please contact me and message me. I maybe not immediately, but I will try to find time to reply to each one of you if you'd like. And if you want to see more of the objects, they're just really fun to read through. So please be welcome to go to Still Not Quiet and browse through a marketplace. But yeah, thank you very much. And if you have any questions, I am happy to answer them.
Thank you so much, Dominika. That was great, and very well timed in terms of what our students are up to at the moment, in the middle of research and starting research, and it's often a very difficult place to be when you're trying to make sense of a new context that you're not used to working in. And I think you took us through some really nice, clear ways that you approach those very different types of projects. And as you mentioned, speculative design is not always very well done. And I think what you showed there is some really good ground rules to be successful at that. I just wanted to kick off the Q&A by asking, you mentioned in one of your examples about the importance as a designer to be very aware of diversity and inclusion. And I was just wondering if you could give us an example of how you approach that in the Victoria Station example.
So the Victoria Station, it was a very short project, and we sadly didn't have time to speak to a very range area, like group of people, which ultimately we'd really like to. So because of this, we didn't speak that much about the actual needs of the future customers, just because we didn't have that many future customers to base it on. But what we did is we tried to, in each one of the stories, make sure that firstly, the diversity that we have represents all genders and non-genders, that we include both in the illustrations that we have, but also the stories that we present, people with different types of abilities, both physical and mental, so that also that certain types of abilities are not just something mentioned in the background, but also are heroes of certain of some of our stories. Also, not moralizing anybody and adding the sort of diversity that we see around us. Even if, I mean, obviously being a place such as RCA, you have a lot of very unbiased people and people who are very open-minded. But if you work with a very certain type of client, that might not be something that is present at their boardroom or at their decision-making table. So to making sure that the diversity that you are portraying in your stories is there, but also is shown in the way that is understandable to these people and something that won't intimidate them, because ultimately we would all want to be very open, accepting, but not everybody is. That is another responsibility of a designer, to include diversity, but be able to show it in a way that everybody will be able to perceive and accept and understand why it is there, rather than question, why would you mention this person? Why would you change the pronoun? Do we even need to? Yes, we need to, but if you do it with empathy, I think we will go further that way.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you for that. So we've got a first question from one of our audience. So Yushwan's asking, mentioning that they find it really difficult to keep interacting with participants. So it's to do with research and engaging with users. So after the first interview, it's how do you develop that relationship so that the participants might stay with you throughout the whole project? Do you have any suggestions that may help them on, getting those good connections? Because you mentioned that at the beginning in the first project in particular. And also it's quite hard to keep people interested as there are no sort of incentives, or they have less incentives to share. So now in lockdown, especially, people need to work more than before. So yeah, any views there?
That's a very valid question, and that is a very real struggle. And knowing that if you're a student, you don't have incentives, thinking that if you're in a professional world, these incentives will always be there, is not necessarily true. Often we don't have incentives either, even though we would like to. But in that project that I mentioned, let's say the incentive was there because we gave our families a technology to test. So it was something that was potentially beneficial to their lives and something that they wanted to get something out of. So that aspect was met. But to keep them engaged for such a long period of time, for several months, and keep having them still provide data and insights from their own lives to us wasn't that easy either. So sometimes you just need to accept that somebody will drop out, and that's okay. But tailoring the approach, I think, was good to us. So for example, we had certain people who were like, oh, we can't meet you every week because we have childcare, but we can meet you every 3 weeks. And we're like, that's okay. You just make sure that you prepare enough questions to cover as much of that ground that you didn't manage to cover in the past 2 weeks, and try to make as much use of that opportunity that you have perhaps rarely. But often it might be the type of engagement that is not suitable for the person. So for example, somebody didn't want to do a diary study by giving us daily entries in what is up in their lives, but they were more more comfortable with doing a little voice memo, or calling us on their way to work, or sending a picture of something because, oh, I have time for that, or I prefer doing this. And that's also data. It's maybe a bit more difficult data to, you know, extract information from, but that's your job as a researcher or as a designer to really do that. So I would say really trying to find the way that is best for the person that you're working with and something that they're most comfortable with. And hopefully they will be grateful that you accommodated their needs, and they will kind of give back with their own time. And yes, people are working, so that's completely fair. And not everybody wants to do a 45-minute interview after work. So if you maybe send them an email, or if you maybe send them a survey, or maybe send them something on WhatsApp, that could help. Non-standard approach.
Thank you for that one. So Serene, who you know, hi Dominika, thank you for sharing your work. I was wondering if you could share a little bit about your experience of working in organisations that focus on innovation. So what challenges and learnings have you kind of gleaned?
So I really worked into organizations. I worked for the Glasgow School of Art in their innovation school, and I worked for the Connect Places Catapult. And these are two very different types of innovations. In the Glasgow School of Art, the work that we were doing, for example, one of my projects was working with the rural communities in the Highlands and Islands of Scotland, predominantly with young mothers and people that are kind of not currently in the workforce, to understand what is there that is missing and what is not provided for them to fully kind of meet their potential. And this is an innovation project. This is something that can bring, because what is innovation? Innovation is, I guess it's up to you to define, but to me, innovation is something that brings new positive change to somebody's life and that enables something that has not been met before. So this type of innovation work was very personal. It was very DIY. It required a lot of in-person meetings, hanging out with people's children and visiting schools. And this is innovation that's no worse than coming up with a new technology, because if you are creating change that is positive, that is an innovation that's worth mentioning. So this was a very different type of work to, for example, working at the Catapult, where a lot of the times we are working with industry professionals, with people who have their own technologies that they want to test and upgrade, or with, I don't know, government who wants to digitize an entire part of the work that they're doing. This is also innovation because it brings something that was analog to something that is digital, or I don't know, enables something to work quicker or smarter. It's a very different approach though, because very often it's a larger scope. There's a lot more stakeholders. And I think what I've learned working in the real world is that very often, if you know, even if you know exactly what is the best way to do things and what is the best outcome, often there's a lot of stakeholders connected to that case. And often you will have to compromise and settle for something that's maybe in the middle ground, because if there is a lot of people at stake, it's very rarely that all of them will have the exact same need. So it is important to understand, sadly but not sadly, in a commercial bit, in a commercial world such as Catapult, you need to understand who is your client predominantly, and then use as much as of your own skills and possibilities to bring all of the other voices to the conversation and try to make it as much inclusive and as much kind of democratic as possible. But ultimately, you really have to work towards the goal of the person that commissioned you the work. And it can be a bit disappointing at the beginning, because you might think that you're failing, or you might think that, oh, that's not why I studied so much, and that's not why I had so many ideas to settle on something that's so basic. But sometimes that basic is a very good first step to then bring it to the next level later on. So understanding that you have to compromise is, I think, an essential first lesson that will have to come to you when you work in an innovation organization. Because most of all, innovation has to be sustainable. And even if you can create something very amazing very quickly, and it's great, and it's like, you know, everything you wanted it to be, if it's not long-lived, often it might be that you could have spent that time doing something a bit less flashy, but a bit more useful and a bit more sustainable. And I think that's our responsibility, to focus on sustainability most of all.
Yeah, very, very well said. The students are very quiet today. I don't know if they're eating their lunch still, but anyway, I'm going to ask another question. And it's sort of, at the moment, we're organising a lot of our projects, a lot of the students' work around different challenge labs to help sort of communicate, I suppose, through that different narratives for people to understand the value and the potential of service design, or as you sort of said, change, positive change. So some of our challenge labs are sustainability, city as a platform, social impact lab, life experience lab. So my question to you is, if you were a student now and you could choose a graduation project to look at and develop, what challenge lab might you choose, and what kind of project do you think would allow you to sort of show off all of the knowledge that you've got now?
Wow, that's a
put you on the spot there, and that's really unfair of me, isn't it? But it's a student spot because they haven't asked any other questions.
No, sure. That's a very good question. I did my own master's on human-computer interactions, and what would it be if we were able to experience each other's emotions. And that's what I'm doing now. So technically went very far from where I set myself to be and where I am now. And for the moment, I was quite confused as of why is that? Because, if I only did service design from the beginning, or if I only did something more city or technology related from the beginning, I would be a lot more comfortable in my job at the moment. But I don't know if that's the answer you would like to hear, but I think that students should do their final major projects in something that they're really passionate about and something that is just really fun for them. Because after you finish university, there isn't that many opportunities, or there will never be that much time and resource around you to do something that you're really passionate about. And even if after doing this extreme, very crazy thing, if that's what you want to do, you end up working for a bank, that's still completely fine, because that experience and that knowledge and that methodology that you developed for your own project that you really believe in will stay with you, and it will either have an impact on your work every day, wherever you end up, or it will materialize again a few years in the future, either as a side project or as another opportunity, and you will come back just enriched by all of the work that you've done in the middle later on. So I would say